Everything you've been told about the Quran is a lie. Now, as a disclaimer, this is my second time putting out this video since in the last time I put out the video, I cited a few things incorrectly, so I just want to redo this video, put it out again. That way I represent everything properly. Now, Muslims will have you believe that the Quran has been perfectly preserved since Muhammad revealed the Quran and has remained unchanged since then. However, in a previous video I made, I proved that that was blatantly false, at least up until the time of Uthman. But what happened after Uthman's standardized copy? I briefly mentioned the 10 Qira'at in my other video, but what are the Qira'at? They are the 10 approved readings or recitations of the Quran from 10 reciters that supposedly have their recitations with isnad chains that go back to Muhammad. Now, you're probably asking yourself, if there is one Quran, why is there 10 recitations? And what differentiates these recitations from each other? That's exactly what we're going to be going over in this video. Now, I have many Muslims tell me that the differences between the Qur'an have to do with dialectical differences and how words are pronounced, but the meanings are the same. For example, like tomato and tomato, both have the same meaning but are pronounced differently. However, when you actually examine the differences, there are much more than just dialect and pronunciation differences, but a lot of times the differences lead to changed meanings of the text and even at times contradict each other. So, one of the smaller differences comes in the first chapter of the Quran in verse 4, where the Hafs Quran, which is what most Muslims use today, says owner of the day. And the Warsh Quran, which is another common Quran that is used in some parts of the world, says king of the day. Now, this may seem like an insignificant difference, but it is a difference more than just dialect, but a vowel difference in the Arabic between the two words. The Hafs has the long aleph, which it makes an active participle meaning owner, while the Warsh is a nominal noun meaning king. So one is pronounced Meliki and the other Maliki. A small difference, but has an effect on the meaning because to be called king of the day has a much more powerful meaning than owner of the day. And these different meanings were not looked at as synonymous, but one was more right than the other, according to Al-Tabri's tafsir on this verse, where he says, therefore, he showed that the first of the two readings is correct, and that the most worthy interpretations of the book, the reading of those who read it, the king of the day of judgment, in the sense of the king's devotion to him on the day of judgment. So Al-Tabari didn't look at the Hafs reading as one and the same with the Warsh, or that they were both valid, but Warsh was correct and Hafs wasn't. But I'm sure Muslims will tell me that even after all that, this difference really doesn't make that big of a difference to the meaning of the text, and it's really not that much of a problem. But what about when there are differences that cause clear contradictions between the Qur'an? In chapter 10, verse 16 of the Hafs Quran, it says, say, if Allah had willed, I would not have recited to you, nor would he have made it known to you. But the Al-Bazi and the Quinbal Qurans read it as, say, if Allah had willed, I would not have recited to you, and he would have made it known to you. So as you could see here, these different Qur'at are saying two different things. One is saying Allah wouldn't have made it known, and the others are saying he would have made it known. So which one is it? Now, this difference is caused by the omission of the aleph, which is after the lam, which you can see here. So this isn't a matter of dialect, but grammatical changes that alter the meaning of the text. And if you don't trust me, read the tafsirs on this verse by Jalalain, Qurtubi, and Al-Tabari, and they all testify to this difference and that it changes the meaning of the text. But this isn't the only time we see a contradiction between the Qira'at. In chapter 11, verse 81, of the Hafs Quran, it says, so set out with your family during a portion of the night, and let not any among you look back, except your wife. And the Al-Bazi Quran is translated the same way in English. However, in the Arabic, according to Al-Qurtubi's tafsir on this verse, Hafs has the phrase "except your wife" in the accusative case, which would mean that she did not go out with him. But in the Al-Bazi Quran, it has the phrase "except your wife" in the nominative case, which would mean that she did go out with him. So Hafs is saying Lot's wife didn't go out with him, and Al-Bazi is saying that she did go out with him. And if you don't believe me, an Islamic scholar named Muhammad al-Amin al-Shatingi from the 20th century said when talking about Ibn Kathir's reading that in the nominative case, "except your wife," there is a contradiction in the verse. So we have two qira'at with contradictory meanings and saying two different things, so which one is correct? And not only are there contradictory changes between the qira'at, but there are even instances of whole verses being removed or added. If you're a Muslim who reads your Quran regularly, then you're aware of what's called the Bismillah at the beginning of every surah, and in Arabic, it's Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, which means in the name of Allah, the ever merciful, the bestower of mercy. However, depending on which Quran you read, it will be included in the Quran as revelation as a verse along with the rest of the Quran, and some won't include it with the rest of the Quran as revelation, but add it as something like a surah title. For example, the Hafs Quran will have it as part of the revelation, but Warsh doesn't. Even the well-known Islamic scholar Yasser Qadi says in his An Introduction to the Sciences of the Quran that, based on this classic difference of opinion, the Qira'at readers themselves differ over whether the Besmillah was a verse in the Surah Al-Fatiha and the other surahs. Among the queries, the readers, Ibn Kathir, Asim, and Al-Kasai were the only ones who considered it to be a verse at the beginning of each surah, whereas the others didn't. So, did the Bismillah come as revelation with the rest of the Quran or not? Well, depending on which Quran you read, you'll get a different answer. Again, we're not talking about minor differences in dialect, but changes that can alter the meaning of the text and even give contradictory meanings, as well as whole verses being included or excluded. Now, some will say that these differences come from the seven Aruf. However, this doesn't work for a couple of reasons. For one, no one knows what the seven Aruf are, as Yasser Qadi also says in An Introduction to the Sciences of the Quran, that the reason that such great differences of opinion exist concerning the exact meaning of the Aruf is due to the fact that there does not exist any explicit narrations from the Prophet or the Salaf concerning the exact nature of the Aruf. These various opinions are merely the conclusions of later scholars based upon their examination of the evidences and their personal reasoning. So no one actually knows what the seven Aruf are, which means you can't attribute the Qira'at differences to something you don't know what it is. And how do you get 10 kirat from 7 a roof? The math really doesn't add up there. Also, if Uthman burned all the differences that existed in his time, and those were the aruf he burned, and then he issued one standardized copy, then why are there differences today? And if you're going to say that the kirat go back to Muhammad and the 7 aruf, which ultimately came from Allah, then why did Uthman burn what Allah revealed in order to unite Muslims over these differences because they were causing such a problem? If they were just going to come back years later and eventually be looked at as a good thing. If these differences were a problem back then, why aren't they a problem now? Something doesn't really add up here. The most logical answer would be that, or that would account for these errors, is that scribes over time made mistakes when copying down the Quran because humans make mistakes when copying things down by hand, or when recalling things by memory. And this is even what Muhammad's earliest companions said is what happened. In Al-Tabari's Tafsir on chapter 4, verse 162, he reports Aisha about his saying, and those who pray, and those who pray, and about his saying, those who believe, those who have guided, and the Sabians, and about his saying, these are two magicians. And she said, oh, my nephew, this is the work of the writer. They made a mistake in the book. So Muhammad's child bride Aisha, who was called the mother of the faithful, attests to scribal errors. And then in Tafsir Manther, it says Ibn Jarir and Ibn al-Anbari included in the Musaf, on the authority of Ibn Abbas, may God be pleased with him, that he read, are those who believe clearly aware? And it was said to him, it is in the Quran, do not those who believe despair? So he said, I think the writer who wrote it while drowsy. So Ibn Abbas, who was known as one of the best interpreters of the Quran from Muhammad's companions, also attests to scribal errors. So this is nothing new to early Muslims. So why are errors such an issue now? When Muslims see differences in the Qira'at, why do they attribute them to Allah instead of scribal errors? My theory is that for years Muslims have said that the Bible has been corrupted and used the variants in the biblical manuscripts to prove this, but I've also pointed out in a previous video that these variants aren't what they make them out to be. But either way, I think that if they concede to the fact that these differences in the Qur'an are scribal errors, then they won't be able to attack the Bible for the same thing and can no longer use variant readings as a way to discredit the Bible, since it is in their own Quran, and they would have to say that the Quran is corrupted in the same way the Bible is corrupted, which is something they won't do. So they would rather blame Allah for these mistakes and throw him under the bus instead of the scribes who are mere human beings. So Muslims, why do you treat your God like this?